Well, we welcome you back with some encouraging news. Blood tests that will more easily identify patients with Alzheimer's disease are on the way. But will these tests be helpful for earlier diagnosis and treatment for patients? We're going to get down to it with more. Neurologist, founder of the Brain Shift Institute, author of The Busy Brain Cure, Dr. Romy Mushtak, and internist at Custom Care Medical, Dr. Frank Contessessa. Great to have you both with us here. Dr. Mushtak, how will these types of tests be helpful? And also, at what point of an Alzheimer's, I would say, diagnosis will they be most beneficial?
Well, thank you for having me here. And this exciting news, we need hope in the world of Alzheimer's disease. This study that was published in Frontiers of Neurology looked at 50 blood samples of individuals who had early cognitive impairment, known as mild cognitive impairment, and looking for a specific fragment in the blood, which makes it so easy to test, to see, looking for cell-free DNA segments that tells us that brain cells are dying. Now, if you don't have dementia or neurodegeneration, this marker should not be in your blood. So what was very promising for this test is it accurately identified those people who had mild cognitive impairment and went on to develop Alzheimer's disease. So very promising initial early research indeed.
Dr. Contessessa, I'm sorry. If you've had anyone or know anyone who's had this horrible disease, I can't stress enough, it is awful, and people, I think, are so desperate to know when they should get maybe this test, when it becomes available, and then, if you start developing symptoms, how you prolong the effects from setting in.
Sure. Well, I certainly know the effects of this disease on a professional level and also on a personal level. I just watched my grandmother go through the worst of Alzheimer's. So one thing, the way that this test is probably going to be put into use, and early on, it's not going to be just given to everybody as part of your yearly physical panel, because it'll probably be on the expensive side. I offer a similar test to my patients that looks for a similar abnormal DNA strand for cancer, and it tends to run about $1,000. It's sort of like an added extra test for people who are interested. So as the price comes down, it may get included into your yearly screening panel. But in the beginning, it'll be for people who show signs of memory deficits and people who we want to screen early. The benefit here is that we can catch and diagnose people early, because there are some new drugs that are on the market now that are able to stop the progression by attacking the amyloid plaques that actually cause the Alzheimer's. But they have to be started early. That's the key. They have to be started early to prevent the worsening of the disease. So I think that's where the utility of this test is going to come in, is picking up those patients right from the beginning and getting them onto some of these newer drugs.
And great points there. That early detection, of course, especially with Alzheimer's, is key. Dr. Frank, I want to get you to this next topic as well. The head of the American Federation of Teachers, president, finally admitted that closing schools and remote learning during COVID was detrimental to children's learning, as math scores across the country were down, according to national tests. I think there's no question that learning was compromised in those schools. But was it even necessary in the first place to close the schools based on COVID threats?
Well, I would say no, Katrina, it was not necessary. And I think, hindsight is 20/20, but I think a lot of us saw that from the beginning. You were dealing with an illness that did not affect children to any great degree, so there was not any really benefit to shutting down schools. And we're only at the tip of the iceberg on the deficits that people are going to see in children, language, learning, socialization. So no, my only surprise is that it took the union boss this long to admit that the lockdowns were a bad idea. And I pray going forward, as we're starting to see some other illnesses on the horizon, that there will not be a knee-jerk reaction to ever shut schools down again.
Yeah, Dr. Mushtak, I'm going to give you one more comment here. Let's expand on schools. What about masks? And for children, is that necessary?
At this point, it's a case-by-case basis. We always want to protect. There are certain children that may be dealing with autoimmune diseases, cancer, and that should be based on an individual basis with a child's doctor and parents. And I think that at this point, knowing the data that we've seen at this point, and the same would be for adults working in the schools, it's a case-by-case personal basis. Again, at this point, the pandemic is over, and And
so no mandate necessary from school districts. Sorry to jump in there.
At this point, looking at the data from the CDC, correct. At this point, no mandate, but absolutely a personal decision based for individuals' needs.
Well, Dr. Romy Mushtaq, Dr. Frank Contessessa, thank you both for coming on. Nice discussion.
Thank you, guys.